Well, hello. Thanks for watching. We're going to be looking at Ruth chapter 2, verses 18 through 23. Very much appreciate nice comments about folks who find these helpful. Really difficult to teach without getting feedback just by nods or looks of confusion. So I do appreciate comments. And um, we're going to kind of, again, as the pattern following is just going to be read through the text, point out a few things, and want to sum up um, um, towards the end just some thoughts. But we'll start by reading. Remember, this is when um, uh, Ruth has gone and gleaned and had happened, as the narrative says, into the field of Boaz. And while she was there, he took notice of her and was very generous. We saw her diligence and faithfulness and hard work, as well as his grace and care for her. He gave her, free rein to come in, and really just kind of went beyond what was required. And so now she is returning after this first day of working in Boaz's field back to Naomi. Um, and she comes with just an amazingly large amount. Picking up in verse 18, and she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, "The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest.'" And Naomi said um, to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with these young women, his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted." So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Um, All right. Um, just kind of notice here, she's now returned, and remember, in addition to Boaz giving all the food, he also shared a meal with her. And so when she returns, she has all this food, and she shows it to her mother-in-law. And then she also brought out, maybe in a pocket or something, the food that had been cooked and shared for the meal. You'll remember it closed off with saying that also gave her what was left over. And as I was looking at this, I was thinking, I think that shows something about Boaz's character, because when Ruth asked Boaz, "Why have you taken notice of me?" Boaz pointed out that her faithfulness to Naomi was one of the things that had been shared throughout the town. That was what people were talking about. And it occurred to me that by giving so much, but also sharing the kind of the leftovers here, was probably Boaz not just taking notice of Ruth, but also his concern for Naomi. And that's possibly the first good meal they had had in a very long time, to eat until they're satisfied. That's our problem, is we eat beyond when we're satisfied most meals. But these people in poverty, and having gone through um, the time when you don't have food in storage up until the harvest, resources are pretty scarce, and to be eat and to be actually satisfied would be a good thing. So what wonderful thing that her mother-in-law notices, is how much she received, and all the even beyond that, of a meal shared. And so she asked, "Where did you glean today? Where have you worked? Who have you been with? Where did you do so well with this?" And she prays for God's blessings on the man who took notice of her. So Ruth kind of recounts what all had happened, And she explains the name of the man's name is Boaz. And with that, we're seeing the plot develop, and we're seeing the possibilities come to us, because Naomi says at verse 20, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. And also, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." So take note, the word kindness. What we're seeing is that word that we've seen several times in the Psalms and throughout Ruth of God's kindness. The word has said it's kind of God's covenant faithfulness, and this kindness and faithfulness is now displayed with Boaz. Boaz is loving and being generous and gracious, and he is showing a kindness that is the same kind of kindness the Lord shows. That's one of the things when we're called to be um, generous, and when we're called to be forgiving, when we're called to be honest, when we're called to care for others. In all those ways, we're doing nothing less than reflecting the character of the Lord. So she's praying God's blessing on the one who has shown God, kindness and not forsaken the living or the dead. And we're going to come back to this idea, but just kind of notice there that what she sees is this kindness isn't just for her. It's not just for Ruth. It's not just for Naomi. Naomi realizes this is kind of a kindness that's being shown to Elimelech and the her two sons who've died. That this grace is being shown to their memory. And so she also points out, and this is kind of the pivot point for the plot of the story, is he is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And so the idea there is one who is part of your family and close enough to you to be a redeemer, to be kind of a representative, someone who stands up for you. We're going to look at that, but here's the realization that the man, he has the position of being a close relative. So he has this kind of status in the family, um, but he also has the character of one who shows kindness. Beautiful combination. Just, it could be that she found someone who was kind and showed love and faithfulness and was a good person, but then didn't have the kind of legal standing, the relationship, or that connection. In some ways, we can talk about people who have the character, but they don't have kind of the position of authority. And there can be others who have kind of a position of authority. There could be somebody who was the relative, and we'll see there's a closer relative, one who is more of a redeemer in position wise, who but doesn't show the same kind of character and concern and kindness. And you all know people who might have a position or a connection, but they don't have the character. And here in Boaz, we have God's blessing them by giving someone who has not only the position and the authority and the standing, but also the character, um, the personality, the moral fiber of one who is showing kindness and love to them. So this is who Boaz is. And Ruth, the Moabite, and the narrator, you'll notice, keeps pointing that out, that she is one who has come from, as being a foreigner, to being part of this. Says, besides, um, he said to me, "You shall keep close by my young men until they have kept my harvest." Pointing out Ruth was a Moabite, I want to kind of return to this verse 20 when she says, "Redeemer, our redeemers." I love that. Naomi and Ruth are united. They're together. And so Naomi's not looking at saying, her redeemer, her families, but now Ruth is included. And so this is because of her coming into this community, of her making that commitment to Ruth. She now has this relationship with Boaz. She goes on to say, not only has he shown this generosity to me, but he's showing me protection. He wants me to stay there until I finish the harvest. And so Naomi, constantly guiding Ruth, constantly instructing Ruth, says it's good to do that. Don't go somewhere else. Stay with where you know there's safety, because you could be assaulted somewhere. Someone else could be dangerous. And there's also the wisdom of just, He's shown this grace. You want to be continue to follow the one who has shown you the grace here. And so we have the summary of several weeks in verse 23. So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So very briefly, we're told she continues this routine. She goes out into the harvest, um, and the barley and the wheat harvest. The wheat follows the barley a few weeks later. So she's spending several weeks out in the field, and this whole time she's staying with her mother-in-law. She hasn't said, I've found someone who's going to care for me. I'm off on my own." She wasn't using Naomi. Her commitment to be with Naomi was true, and she is being faithful to that. Um, and so what we see is this beautiful blessing of providing for them, providing more than they need. Naomi, who has said, "I was empty and I was full and went away, and God made me empty," and that she's returned empty, is now being refilled. I think it can be easy for us to forget the that pattern of harvest and storing that, and sowing and hoping for the harvest, and kind of the realization that what you harvest is your livelihood. What they glean, what they bring in, is going to be their livelihood until the next year's harvest. So it's not that they can run down to the store, but whatever they get, that's not only what they're eating at that time, but it's also what they're storing up for later. And so they have hope for the future because this abundant grace is shown to them, this abundant generosity shown to them. All right, so let me kind of come back and just talk a little bit about the relationships, and also that Redeemer. That's such a important part of the story of Ruth. Indeed, important part of the whole Bible. Um, so one of the things I saw in this was, notice the way the families, there's a connection beyond just a couple and their children. I think we can very often think about a family as very much the nuclear family, husband, wife, 2.5 kids, whatever. But here we see the connection and the relationship of realizing there's bonds beyond that. And so notice, if Boaz's generosity is in part because he sees Ruth's care for Naomi, Boaz is already starting to kind of care and look out for Naomi. Naomi realizes that when Boaz is blessing them and giving them the grain, his kindness to Ruth is reflective of his kindness also to her husband who is dead, Elimelech, and her two sons, because she praises him for showing kindness to the living and the dead. So she recognizes that by showing her kindness and showing Ruth kindness, he's showing kindness also, and keeping in mind that extended family. This is something I that might not be obvious to us. And when I do premarital counseling, one of the things I kind of point out is you're not just marrying each other, you're marrying families. Family connections come together in a wedding, and it's a good thing, but it can also be a difficulty if you're not expecting it. But it should be a good thing that you recognize that now you have obligation to one another's parents, to one another's extended family. You become part of this, and things that happened affect you, and things that are shared are beyond. You're not insulated from that, or shouldn't be. That's not the biblical view. And so we have here even the sense of beyond generations, and also um, you know continuing even beyond death. And part of that, biblically, is the idea of the kinsman-redeemer, the near kinsman, or just redeemer. The idea there, and we've kind of looked at it earlier with talking about the Levirate marriage, where if there were two brothers and one of the brothers was married and he died, that the living brother would marry the widow. And the idea being that family takes care of other family. They do so economically, legally, in many different ways. And this is one of the things we see with the idea of the kinsman. Okay, so we're going to look at redemption and um, the some of the examples from the Bible of the way that plays out. So the first of these is if someone becomes so indebted, impoverished that they have to sell themselves into slavery, then a brother or the next closest of kin would act as a redeemer, would come in and pay them back and redeem them. That is, they would pay the price to free them from slavery. Now, keep in mind, biblical slavery was more like indentured servitude. It wasn't what we knew in the 19th century, and it was a different system. And so it would really be if you had so much debt you couldn't pay off, in order to, you know, continue to have food and to have labor, you would go into servitude. So anyway, the we see this in Leviticus 25, verses 48 and 49. After he's sold, he may be redeemed. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle, or his cousin may redeem him, or a close relative from his clan may redeem him. Or if he grows rich, he may redeem himself. The idea being that, if you can't do this, someone comes in and advocates for you. They purchase you, and they've redeemed you. They've brought you into freedom. Um, the next way a kinsman might redeem and act in this way is, if you were, again, impoverished, in debt, and you needed resources, and you had land, you could sell that land. And a redeemer could come back in and had the right to purchase it. The idea was, the land is God's land, and He divided it among the tribes. And so the idea was, the tribes were to keep that land with amongst themselves, keep it evenly distributed among the different tribes. And so Leviticus 25:47 through 55 talks about that if someone's land is sold, or if the person is sold into slavery, that they can redeem him, or redeem that land. We won't read that, but we'll move on to the next one. So there's also, this was a time when there wasn't a police force, there wasn't as much of a legal system. There wasn't a DA's office. So if someone was murdered, um, that murder would be avenged by the closest kin. They were to seek justice. And so this was the avenger of blood, but it's the same word, kinsman, redeemer. Um, so Numbers 35:19 and following, the avenger of blood shall himself put the murderer to death. When he meets him, he shall put him to death. And if he has pushed him out of hatred, or hurled anything at him, lying in wait so that he died, or in enmity struck him down with the hand so that he died, then he who struck the blow shall be put to death. He is the murderer, and the avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when he meets him. So the system that the avengers, the kinsman's responsibility was to execute judgment. Um, the kinsman, the redeemer, would also be the one who would receive restitution, um, for another's wrong. So if there was a system, Numbers 35 kind of lays out the same sort of thing, that if someone is killed, but it wasn't done premeditated, there was to be a restitution paid, but it wasn't to be capital punishment. So the one that payment was to be made to was the kinsman. And so part of this is also that they're advocating for justice. They're making sure that gets done, on behalf of the deceased relative. And then finally, we see also that the Redeemer was one who would also push for justice and other causes. So Proverbs 23:11 talks about the Redeemer is strong; he will plead their cause against you. The one who comes in and advocates for your place, seeks justice on your behalf. Who does this is your kinsman, your Redeemer, your near kinsman, and so this is what role we see Boaz being able to play, and of course, all of this points to the role that Jesus plays for us as our Redeemer. Boaz shows us a picture of that. Um, kind of well, I have the book here. Robert Hubbard's commentary on the book of Ruth has been helpful in kind of laying out the different roles of the Redeemer, and he sums it up as really there's kind of two underlying assumptions of what a Redeemer is doing. One is you want to is it somebody who has a connection with you as part of your tribe, as part of your family. They have this connection and they have this relationship. And so by Ruth coming in with her relationship, um, her commitment to stay with Naomi means she has this kind of covenantal connection, this connection through her family with Boaz. And so that's one thing is we need is you have to have that relationship and that connection. The second assumption that Hubbard points out is really the point of redemption is whether it's economic, whether it's legal, all these different things that are going on is it's to restore the family, restore the kin, restore the tribe to wholeness. A wholeness of justice, a wholeness of the land that they own, financial and freedom. And so it's one, if you think about it, it's just a lot of different things they would do, but all of it was to restore the relationship of being free, being, in connection with others, being whole and being healthy. And that's a good picture of salvation. And it's a good picture of who Jesus is for us. We who are foreigners, we who are outsiders, through trusting in Him, become part of His tribe, if you will. We become part of His covenant family. And He is our Redeemer who advocates for the Father for justice, that He's paid the price. He's the one who redeems us, who pays the penalty on our behalf, who frees us from slavery to sin and death by Himself paying the cost. And so he has that status, that true status that through faith in him we are united, and he is our covenant head. He is our redeemer. He is our near kinsman through our faith in him. But he also has the character of one who is gracious and loving, the very image of the Father, who is willing to give himself up and all that he has in order to redeem us and to make us whole and healthy and back into where we need to be and to restore us into the family from which we fell. Um, well, we continue to see how the families work together the families work together to bring about this redemption as the story of Ruth continues. But just as we meditate on that role of Redeemer, we see a fuller picture of who Christ is and what He did for us. Well, take care. Blessings. Thank you.